Welcome to our Saturday morning session. We normally have a roundtable at this time, but today we are doing a solution raising on media and how we get our information. So it's an hour-long conversation where we can generate potential solutions for 10,000 people and $100,000. We start with 15 minutes on what we currently do in this space. So whoever wants to start, what does your information sources look like, either for you as an individual or what you think society is doing, good and bad? And I can start. I don't know if Adriel and Bentley want to start because I want to take a little bit more of a back seat to listen. Daniel, do you want to start? Do you have anything?
Yeah, sure. Because I still don't think I have a lot to say on this subject. I get a ton of information from YouTube. I think that's the majority of the way I spend my information gathering. Podcasts, on YouTube, essentially. If I want to dig deeper, I'll go to Wikipedia. I'll check some of the, some news sites, BBC, USA Today, CNN, Al Jazeera sometimes, just to see if I'm, missing something important, like breaking news wise. But that's definitely secondary from getting information from podcasts on YouTube. And then shows like John Oliver, I'll watch that. And I think that's, and then I'm on Facebook a bit too. So what people are throwing around there, try not to do the echo chamber thing. I like the fact that I do have a variety of friends, and that's a good thing. That's my current situation. That's what I currently observe going on in my life. I haven't thought enough about it to know what I would do to make it different. There was the Wikipedia folks started that network for, what is it called? It's the Wikipedia News Network. And you can create an account and you can post news stories, but you can edit the title. So you make the title of the news story more accurate. So if you are on that social network and all it is news and you're scrolling through news stories and it's, they're categorized and you can dig into like the topics that you want to follow. But if I post a news story on there, I have the ability to just totally change the title to make it more accurate, but it's Wikipedia. So if I post it, someone else can change it, and it's supposed to hone in on the truth. I can't remember the name of it. I'll look it up right now, and I think that's all I got.
Awesome.
I can go next.
I've never heard of that before. I've definitely heard of Wikipedia, so I didn't know that was going on.
I'll look right now here.
Sounds like a good idea. Yeah, for me, I was less about my news sources. I get less news sources, so kind of just have put up blinders to what's currently going on because I feel like there's only so much I can take in. But I watch Democracy Now! I also watch Al Jazeera, and I sometimes watch The Young Turks, as well as just the comedy ones. I like to get my news through comedy. So like the Saturday morning or Saturday Night Live's Weekend Update and Trevor Noah and all the people in that realm. The issue is a lot of what we're tackling in it. Like there's a lot of misinformation. It's a news story that's designed for entertainment instead of for information. And they have to like if you're talking about, let's say, war in the Middle East, well, you can't give the whole background every time. And so it's like, you can't really say why it's happening. All you can do is you don't even necessarily know accurately if something happened and then why it happened. And like, there's no way to get the background information. It's just basically a news feed of stories. Like right now during COVID-19, everything seems to be about COVID-19. It's like, okay, I get it. I was attached to the news for the first week, but what story are you going to tell? Like what? It's 24/7. So then they have to sensationalize everything. And so that people are here instead of on your channel for COVID-19. And there's a big problem that we get our entertainment from our news. And so it's sensationalization. And then the changing of the title, right? For clickbait. when it's not like there was just one for COVID-19 of like a baby dies in South Africa. Well, no, that's not what happened. Someone had COVID-19, gave birth, and the baby died. Did they die from COVID-19? They had it, but they were also premature and had lung issues. And like, you know, like there's just, but the article was definitely misleading. And so a lot of misinformation. And Adriel, Bentley, would you like to say what you, because I know you're working in this realm, so why?
Yeah. Well, as far as my personal information diet, it is mostly YouTube right now. I got some YouTubers that I follow, mostly science, space, and then some dealing with software development, which is the area I'm in, and then some for entertainment, and some that do like Lego buildings and more, more entertainment. I'm on Facebook, although I just realized I missed several large news stories because I blocked everyone who, not blocked, I just unfollowed everyone who tends to be low quality information sources, and apparently that was most everyone. So, so I'm kind of way out of the loop on lots of stuff. But yeah, I used to watch the television news, but then it's mostly just kind of a daily death count, and then here's two good feel good stories, and then here's some news that has no real impact onto my life. It's just the most entertaining for people to watch, as opposed to actually informative. And I haven't really found a solution for that, although I guess really looking at it, I'm not sure that there's a lot of information going on in the world that is important. I mean, what's really important to me is what's happening in the industry I work in and in the areas that I have interest. So like regular news is not important. It's good to know what your government is up to. So it'd be nice if I had a reliable source of that, but every news source you go to is coming from a slant, and I just don't have the time or the energy to disambiguate where they're slanting, where they're inaccurate, and where they're doing all that all on my own. But I haven't really curated those news sources yet to make sure I'm on things. In the digital world, in my industry, it's much easier. So I've kind of curated there. And then I'd like to, I started my project, Reason Score, because there is such. It's so hard to determine the actual quality of the. Maybe the way to say it is the proximity of that information to actual reality. Is something that's hard to determine. So I decided I wanted to make that easier, and almost 10 years later, I'm not that much further on it. But I don't want to dive into too much of that unless it comes up in the conversation naturally. So I've pretty much blocked everything out. I mean, I'm on Twitter and Facebook, but those are very curated feeds of mostly my industry and stuff, and then a couple of people that I follow, and still a good half their content I don't care about. I mean, it would be nice, I guess we'll get into this later, but it'd be nice to have more control over what I see. So so we'll get into that later part of it, but that's pretty much me. So
I guess I'll go quick. I just kind of like you guys, I try to check out a variety of different media types. So I do watch some mainstream news, and I'll go to Democracy Now! And a lot of YouTube, but just really trying to make my own choices and look at each one from their angle and be like, okay, they're trying to push something. How do I feel about it? Just kind of neutralize what I'm seeing. So that's about it.
I guess I can go next. So for actually watching the news, I don't watch the news for news purposes all that much anymore, mostly because I don't trust almost anyone. I tend to watch it kind of as a spectator. I intentionally did not unfollow or unfriend all the people posting that stuff on Facebook. I like to see what they post, and I like to see what, how people counter it. I also like to see what people on the opposite end of the spectrum post and how different those two things are. And then when I tend to dig deep is when there's something especially interesting, like the two groups just really don't agree on some key information, and then to go and poke around and see like what it actually seems is going on, a lot of the times it's incredibly difficult to find information that I'm like, oh, I that seems trustworthy. I now have made a choice on what's going on. That is incredibly rare. But yeah, other than that, I tend to like the comedy news sources, that type of thing. Still take those with a grain of salt too, because it's still often try to push a narrative. But still funny.
Matush, do you want to share what you do for news or what you think is good and bad about the space right now?
Well, there's a lot of bad things about the news right now. Sorry for the background noise. What I do is I have my preferred few sources of information, and I found it very. Please give me 5 minutes.
All babies interrupting Zooms and streams since, well, long before they existed.
I can do a second thoughts. Something else came to mind that I noticed. So as someone that doesn't work in journalism, I think we do need journalism. I have no background in that, but I know, well, it appears that industry is just struggling as a whole. Like, that's why I like the long form YouTube things where it seems like, people can really share nuanced opinions and whatnot. What sometimes, I guess, baffles me is some folks will post articles I see on my social media to sites that have subscriber paywalls, and I can read like the first 2 paragraphs, and then I'm just left with this feeling like, gosh, if this is important information, like, people should be able to know about it. And but if people are providing a good service, how, should they be compensated? Yeah, I don't know how to solve that problem, but sometimes I'm like, I'll see something that looks really important, and I'm like, should I be paying $5.99 a month for this? I don't know. Like, I don't know how to value it. But if this is important for being on planet Earth, why are we paywalling important information? I have no clue. That's just something else I notice.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I think all of the trust issues, or I guess not all of them, but a great number of the ones that came to light were just because as a society, we decided that we didn't need to pay for news anymore. We don't need, newspapers. It's online. It's free forever now. I'm never paying for news again. Is not everyone's, but I think enough people's standpoint that then news organizations had to scramble to figure out how do we stay in business. And some didn't. And then some did, but they either had to, go sketchy with clickbait headlines and heavy advertising, or they had to sell, to Jeff Bezos or somebody who now owns a bunch of different news organizations. And we're starting to see that same pull, of just like the government legislation and things sort of skewing in their favor. The ones that own the media, surprisingly enough, have the media skewed in their favor.
Yeah, I do like some of the solutions that people have been working on in that space that haven't caught on, like, microtransactions. So maybe I'm not paying $5.99 a month, which, anyways, that, if I read an article, then it'll, charge like 3 or 4 cents or something like that to my account.
I would love something like that.
Yeah, so there's been a couple.
And so that's meant to be across like all the different news agencies. So like in the case of Daniel's thing, he goes to read a page, he gets halfway through it, and it paywall blocks him. Instead, he might pay a couple dollars a month, and then each article he reads, as soon as he goes there, it's like, oh, that writer gets 5 cents.
Yeah. I heard of something. Cool. I guess it was referred to as tipping, and that. Mm-hmm. I mean, we need a language for this. I'm not sure that's it, but it's like, yeah, you can read an article since you've logged in with your account. By the end of it, you click a button, and yeah, it sends 2 cents or 4 cents, whatever, to that author.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. The problem is getting enough organizations to take it on that it's a consistent enough environment, so nothing's caught on. There's like buy me a coffee, and there's several tipping things, and then also you have transaction costs, so you have to figure out a way to handle reduce the transaction costs where you can do it in fraction, in pennies, because a credit card transaction is 25-cent charge minimum, 25 to 30. So yeah.
I know we didn't fully tackle what is currently happening in the information space, but we're at the 15-minute mark, so now we can move on to what we would like to see in this space. So in our perfect version of a world, how are you getting news? How is the world getting news? They don't need to match one another's. You can give your vision. You can even contradict yourself. I'm sure I will. So anyone who would like to share that?
Sure, I guess I'll start. One of the things is on the funding. One of the things that I think they do in the UK is with their TV licenses. And then a lot or possibly all of that money goes to the BBC. And so that ends up being a form of income that's reliable, that from what I can tell isn't as dependent on like the government being happy with you, which is one of the things that's really dangerous, like in Canada, where we have the CBC, but the government can control how much money we actually give them. And so if it's an organization, so if the government maybe doesn't like what the news is saying about them, they can then start to cut funding, which kind of defeats the purpose in a lot of the case. So something similar to the BBC, where it's tax basically, but it's not through the government as far as where, like, if they wanted to change the tax or who it goes to, it would probably end up being like an election where we're saying, hey, how much do the people think that these news organizations should get and who should get it? And the government can't just touch anything to do with that tax without massive public approval.
Yeah. Or were you done there, Adriel?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do have kind of concerns about that, but I don't have a better solution. What I would like to see is being able to subscribe to specific topics and be able to filter my news. So I'd like to be able to ask an AI, or I'm concerned about black box AIs, but something where you can set up rules on what content you want to receive. But then I also, if someone's posting an article, ideally all of their source content should be available. Like if they talked on the phone or sent an email to that person, why are those recordings not fully available, right? You don't have to read it in the article, but give me a link to go to that source stuff. So just some general kind of guidance on how journalism happens in a world where actual storing of content is not the expensive thing. The expensive thing is the attention and the quality of time. And then, some sort of kind of better feedback mechanism than comments and stuff, so that as the information changes or as you can get more input, because I think a lot of time the reason why we have such a divisive environment is that the content that's created is slanted, and there's no way to make sure that the knowledge of the other group is in there. And not that I think everything needs to be like completely balanced between the two sides, but if we can fully represent the intent of both sides, then I think that news could be trusted much better, because you can see everything. But then, of course, it's a lot of data, and you have to figure out how to summarize it, which is part of what I'm working on. So being able to control what content I see to a better extent, having it be able to go as deep as I want into that content, rather than having just the final published product, and then kind of a feedback mechanism so it grows and improves, would be something I'd like to.
Having a medium grade AI would be very useful. Something like in science fiction literature, you can have something called eButler, which is like in your background, just sifting through the news and presenting you with relevant data, and also able to get both points of view. Like for every fact, you can have multiple views on. We know what happened, like the president said this and this, but then interpretations there are lots of, and left side, right side, they all have the same raw data, the same fact, but they interpret it in totally different way. So what I found useful was basically for each piece of news to read extreme left and, well, maybe not extreme, because extreme is not very useful, but left and right sources and get their interpretation and then interpolate from that more or less. I know what happened, but I then know why something happened, and I usually can see how it is connected to like everything else. So yeah, so something that could do it for me would be very useful, because these days it seems there is no unbiased source of information anymore.
Have you already looked at like allsides.com, or I think there's 2 or 3 projects that try and give you a single article written by multiple, or a single topic covered by multiple news sources. Have you seen that?
I haven't.
All
so I
sides
think-
is pretty cool.
Allsides.com, I think.
Yeah.
Or it's
Send me the link and
.org.
I'll put it in the description for the YouTube one after. There's also the one that Daniel had suggested, the WT social, Wiki Tribunal social, that we had talked about in the beginning section. Theoretically, that's what we talk about in the beginning section. We also say what's working and what's beautiful, and then we can link to all those to be like, here's what's cool and happening, but we haven't necessarily been actually doing that. And I can't see who's muted or not, but if anyone else would like to share, then they are.
Okay, so
Sure, I got-
oh.
No, go ahead.
So if I could dream big, just took a couple notes here. So I wish that news was just more straightforward, more to the point. You know, where the most relevant information was right at the top, and then, you know, as the story expands and there's more detail, it's further down. I think my experience is it's not quite like that. I should get the meat, the most important part of the story in the first couple sentences, and then, you know, I don't think I'm seeing that. News that's more straightforward. I wish I could trust the headlines. We mentioned that a little bit, but gosh, how many times do I read a story and I'm like, this isn't what the headline was saying. It's weird. I wish that there was more emphasis on, I guess, just better topics, emphasis on technology news, that and health news. So when people felt like they went to whatever website or thing they're reading, I mean, we're not, the news seems so much about like personalities and just stories that aren't like helpful to my well-being. I don't know how else to put it. I wish that there were stories that showcased good role models and people that, and role models like that, you know, were kind of achievable in life. Like, wow, look at this person and how they got their life together or something. Like, I mean, that would be cool. You know, you can find those, but they're just not in the main things. I wish that journalism wasn't like pandering to political parties or corporations. There are some stories that, like, if you know what you're looking for, they're kind of like an ad, but it's, you know, cloaked as a news story. So that's a wish. I wish that, I guess finally that it wasn't, we had news. There are real things to fear in the world, but I wish that it wasn't playing to people's fears so hugely. And like, there are terrible stories, but I think.
All right, Daniel, I'm just gonna, do you have one more point you would like in the future before? And then I just wanted, the 3 of us haven't shared yet. So Shiloh, Adriel, would you like to share? Thank you, Daniel.
I'll just say quickly, I'd like to see more, like I'm a half hour away from the state capitol in Washington here, but I'd like to see more of my local community news. Like we don't have any way to totally connect, but there's thousands of people here, and I'm sure there's news. I mean, there are like neighborhood, different webs, whatever, but it's very random and rare. So it'd be kind of cool just to see the positive stuff that's going on in your community. So that's it.
You want to go, Aid?
Sure. So I think building a bit on what Bentley talked about with the seeing a heavy emphasis on the underlying source, also understanding through all the different channels involved who the experts are that are being touted. Because as we see, like, for example, with the whole COVID-19 thing, oh, we brought on a doctor to say this. Okay, but a doctor of what? Doctor of philosophy? I don't care what that person has to say about the virus. I mean, I do, but don't tell me that they're a doctor, because that's not the, that's not the implication that they're using, is that the person has, a doctorate of something. If the news says that a person's a doctor, that means something to people. And I feel that there's a lot of that going on. And that's a sort of a cornerstone of the misinformation thing, is people kind of now know we can't trust our governments, we can't trust news. I think overall, we know that we can trust some experts, but now we don't know which ones. And they're all being touted with the same, like, oh, this person is great, they're smart, you should totally trust what they're saying. And then they contradict each other. And so then we have to figure out, okay, so now it's not even figuring out the source, because this person has a bunch of history and probably a ton of sources that they've reviewed. How do I tell them apart? I'm done.
All right. I will try to quickly share mine. There's a lot of background I think we need before the actual, that isn't just information, like tools that help us assess and understand science, because unfortunately the media is where we get our science from, as well as history, to be able to zoom in and out of history and truly understand it and understand the complexities of it, I think would really help with news in particular. That being said, for news, I want it broken down into what is happening, what actually is happening. How do I know that happened? How do I trust it? Why did it happen, which I can go do from the history? And also, what does it mean for the future? Why does this matter, right? So that's going to be speculation, and it's going to be very arbitrary. I can't think of the word, like arbitrary. It's going to differ between person, but the facts shouldn't. And so, what happened we could have differing opinions, but the actual fact should be the same. But even just having one place to see that it's more gray area, to have it broken down into who was involved, how do we know they were involved, what happened, having multiple sources of photographers and journalism, where you're having, what is a journalist, I guess, is a big, because if we all have phones, are we all journalists? Because journalists are either reporting the facts or they're giving you the commentary. And if it's the commentary, I do want journalists who can tell me the story in a way that's going to be somewhat entertaining, and it's more, I'm going to get that information. And so what does that look like, and how do they get paid for it without breaking news in itself? Because if I'm going to get paid for interesting, then I'm going to pick the most interesting stories. I'm going to sensationalize them, and I'm going to put clickbaity titles on them so that I can get my 5 cents per journal article. So I want to have it broken down to who, what, when, where, why, how, and be able to truly see what parts are black and white and what parts are more gray, and change, and be able to see what went into this event happening without them needing to give me that every time a news story starts. So we have about a minute and a half left if anyone else wants to give any final thoughts for this section before we move on to the adjacent possible.
I was just thinking, and I don't know if this fits into that section or this section, but maybe a news jury where you randomly select 20 people to look at a news article, they rate it, and then that determines whether they see it rather than the clickbait titles and some of the other stuff. And maybe have them tag it as well.
Just the idea of having a pool of money, where we, the CBC, but instead of the government saying, yes, we can take or give your funding, having the funding, and then having the Canadian citizens, in this case, the CBC, say, what do we want to know? And also being able to say how much of my local news I want and how much global news I want, right? There's things that happen all over the world. I'm like, why don't I know about that? That's a much bigger story than what's happening in America right now, which is
yeah. So I sort of instead of a liquid democracy, a liquid news organization.
Yeah.
So if you say,
I'm just trying to think of how to get that
$5 a month towards news, and then you can say, okay, I want 2 of that federally, 2 provincially, and 1 locally. And then I can pick the news outlets, and then that kind of becomes almost like a Patreon, where that person says, oh, I've got, 1 million subscribers, each paying me $3 a month. All right, I've got 30 million a month or that's 3 million to play with.
Perfect. Daniel, you want to give a quick thought before I was like, that's a perfect
I
transition?
like that jury idea. One other idea now, if this already exists, then like.
Okay, I'm just saying, wait, 1 second, Daniel. Sorry, because we are switching over to the next topic, which that'll be perfect for, which is maybe not, because maybe it's too much money, in which case I'll let you still say it. But so now we're talking about what we could actually create right now if we had 10,000 people and $100,000, because it sounds like that might be in what you're saying. So go. What was the piece you wanted to add?
If it could already exist, I mean, what if you had a way to have a site that stories were voted up by significance or something? So you'd have like maybe like a crowd sourced, so that, because right now as we have it, the companies that are controlling the narratives, they decide always what's at the top, right? So I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's Reddit, but
Sure.
I do like the idea of having the relevance be, so I vote, right? I read something and I say, oh my God, yes, everyone needs to. But it doesn't necessarily say everyone needs to. They look at it and say, oh, well, you're Vancouverite. Of course you think everyone needs to know this. And it would send the Vancouver stories to the Vancouver people, right? Or would upvote those. And it's like, oh, you're queer. Yeah, no wonder you want to watch that. You know what I mean? Like it takes my demographics into account and then helps me vote in that way so that I can say, yes, this is relevant. Everyone needs to know this is going on. But it kind of only goes to the relevant people of like, you know, like when Daniel mentioned technology, everyone needs to know about technology. I want to know about technology. I know a ton of people don't care at all, right? So like for me to say everyone needs to know this is what's happening in Apple, probably isn't gonna, but there's like an AI that could help us get that.
I think for that, I think you vote on the category. Like how important is this thing to that category? So is this super important for technology? Great. If I don't care about technology, still don't show me. But like if it's, you know, low importance for technology and business, but high importance for the environment, then that can start to show you or start to control who it's shown to. If other people who also like the environment said, hey, this is important for the environment, it's not saying, you know, that you're going to agree with it or what. It's just saying it's an important topic to discuss as far as that topic goes.
yeah, and I think that's kind of how Reddit ended up working today, because you subscribe to specific channels, so they're voted up in the channels. So it's not presented that way, but I think it has a similar net result, which I think that still has the challenge with the clickbaitier titles tend to get clicked up. And that's why kind of the jury method is a way of taking that out. You know, as like being a member of the network, you agree that you're going to review 5 articles a week or some X number of articles for a period of time and rate it.
Yeah, I think on that, mixed with the jury, I think you also have sort of like fake articles that aren't published. And I'm not sure if there's like template articles where you can just plug in, you know, it's like a news Mad Libs, where it's just sort of plugging, you know, name, verb, da 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 da. Or if it actually takes an existing article and just says, okay, we're going to make a couple of tweaks and, you know, change Trump to Hillary and change a couple of things and just see how your voting might change. See if you know, think, well, now it's absolutely true. You just said it was fake for the other person. To do something like that so that you have a jury, but it's also using that information from when they were given, like, hey, what do you think about this article? Oh, you think that's terrible? Okay, it's not true. And you just said it was fine 5 minutes ago for that person.
Yeah, to have some sort of bias detection by rating the individual person's ability to be unbiased. That's interesting. So if we wanted to, I mean, is that kind of where we're going, do you think, for the the people in the money, or does anyone have another suggestion?
Don't need to have one particular. It's just like anything that is is that plausible for $100,000 and 10,000 people? I don't know. You guys are tech to know more about the finances, so I don't think so. Like, what could we solve for news with 10,000 people? Right? Maybe.
I mean, I could build that in a weekend, so it wouldn't look good. And if you had 10,000 people willing to try it, but yeah, I don't want to stop there.
And that's
if anyone has other ideas.
The jury thing you're talking about, that that you could build in a weekend?
Yeah, it would just be Reddit with an additional piece that it chooses, 5 random people for an article that comes in and has them review it before it shows it to the community. So people would still, well, I mean, you wouldn't be able to make your own news company, but you could have it to where people could post articles to it that they see, and then it puts it through the random jury, and then it spits it out on the homepage, and then has tagging. So yeah, I think that could be.
Yeah, I mean,
built.
I think there ends up being like this is a really difficult thing, and I think this is where Billy and I are trying to all right, don't talk the entire time because he and I probably both could. There's a bunch of different sort of prongs of attack that I think you need to do to actually get it, and I think part of it is you have to be able to tackle the expert thing, because if you have experts giving their feedback on this and the article and this and that. Well, why should we trust that person? Yeah. And then the evidence that's being dissected, we kind of have to have some notion of understanding that. Because then, either A, are they understanding it properly, or B, is this 1 out of 10 articles on that topic, and it's the only one that points in that direction, and the other 9 are pointing in the opposite direction? How do we tell? Yeah,
the jury idea only really fixes the clickbait issue.
Right.
If someone still has a very eloquently worded false information, it'll still spread.
Right.
So it doesn't help with actual resemblance to reality.
Yeah, I think it tackles an important thing, but I think with all of it, if we just fix one, it's just going to get gamed in a slightly different way. So it sort of needs to be multiple things happening, not necessarily at the same time, but in tandem-ish, so that at some point they're all sort of touching and going towards the same goal, which hopefully prevents these individual things from being gained.
Yeah, so have a secondary thing of kind of fact checking and validation of experts, which is very much in the WikiLection space, and fact checking, which would be reason score space, which we could dive into detail if anyone wants to.
So for the moment, I'm going to invite Adriel and Bentley to watch instead of participate, and then see what everyone else comes up with in the adjacent space. And maybe I might also, because I have my own ideas, but I haven't worked on them, so I'm very nebulous. It's I just want information. What do you think 10,000 people would want in a news source? What is it that they get from news that together we could solve? News to me is information. So it's truth and trust. And so asking people, how do you know it's true? And then how do you trust something? And then figuring out how to make something with that involved in it. What could that look like with that isn't $1 million? Because all of my ideas are I already said I need the science and history one in place. So that's already, we need these ones in place to tackle this. How can we just tackle this with what's going on? What could we have?
The question
to be clear,
is,
I'm going to try to shut up, so it's all on you guys.
Wiki Tribune has the clickbait thing and the categories thing already. It doesn't have the juries. We could buy ads for Wiki Tribune with $100,000 or 10,000, whatever. We could.
And send them where?
Send more people to a site that.
Oh, I see. You mean
doing something pretty close to. I mean, as long as we're throwing options out there. If we had $100,000, we could buy ads to help people know about Wiki Tribune. Just practical.
What we could do, well, Adriel and Bentley are on mute, is have all of the people with sense-making projects that already exist. What was my point? Come together and create one. Come together and say, although, what does yours offer? How do we, have a third party rate them? Have a third party say, here's why we would use Reason Score or Wiki, what is it called? Wiki Tribune Social or WikiLection. Oh. Having it be a third party assess what these things look like, or news sources. How can we, enough people watch the news? I'm going to have 5 different thoughts at once. Enough people watch the news. If we were able to say, no, what's wrong and what works with what we're watching on network news, and have a conversation. I I like conversation about current events, but like a conversation and not a tweeting and yelling at each other and having actual, is something we could do. Is it going to get us be more informed? No, but it would make it more fun.
One of the problems is the 10,000 people, where do they come from? I mean, the background and why. No, statistically, if you get random 10,000 people, the news you're going to get like about the Kardashians and all the stuff that is totally not relevant to anything, I'm afraid. And if you are talking about 10,000 people who are who would like to see news that are relevant and maybe something about science and about technology and about serious stuff, then I guess the best use for 10,000 minds is curation of the news from, like, there's a source that is more or less trusted to get at least the facts right, and then 10,000 pairs of eyes can, I guess, curate the news quite well. And statistically, in that 10,000 minds pool, there would be at least a few experts, or at least people who know about any field enough to ask right questions. If someone comes up with even very eloquently written article, which is false nonetheless, someone in that 10,000 people group would be able to come up with sufficiently sharp questions to poke the balloon of the falsity of that article, in that article. So yeah, and a few dollars as a reward for finding false news, maybe, and for rewarding good articles, and for rewarding curation process itself. So not a lot, but still something that feels like a reward.
So the 10,000 is purposefully vague because it can be any 10,000 you want it to be. So we could get 10,000 journalists together and ask them, right? Your business is dying, yet what you do is so important. What could we create that gets people the information, gets you your needs met, and gets an information source? And that might be what it comes through, right? Is 10,000 journalists create a platform but they also need to include that they have to include trust and transparency. And we might, if it's only designed for them, we're not going to pay for it, right? So it needs to be balanced with, is it worth whatever the cost is? How do you finance journalism in a way that isn't going to bias it?
Yeah, it might be helpful to look at some of those microtransaction models, like if they exist. Could you use tokens that are cashed out, once they hit a certain limit, so you're not getting crushed by the transaction fees, and you have like community voting essentially on articles? And I mean, I don't know, I'm just throwing ideas around. If we want to pay people, for doing really good stuff that doesn't have the corporate and the backing of things, of entities that have agendas, we got to free up these folks to really do what they're talented at.
There was a blockchain Steam, it's called, and it works more or less like this, exactly like this. You can, it's not a news site, it's not a site, it's a kind of a blogging space, maybe, something like this. But the point is, it uses microtransactions, and everyone is able to vote on some articles they like. And voting is basically identical to paying the author of the article. So I'm not sure how well it works. I looked at it years ago, and it was just starting. I'm not sure if it how it works now. So, I mean, if the model is proven to be doing a good thing or not, but something like this exists.
Shiloh, do you have any?
I have a couple things, and I don't know if they fit in right here. One thing I was thinking is if we had like credentials of the sort, each person that puts out an article, then there's like a link to all the articles they've put out before and where they've gone, so you can kind of get a framework of their stance, and just an easy way to click on that so you can see their history in a way. Also, I was thinking a lot about, right now we're talking online and clicking, but what about radio? I feel like radio is actually possibly more harmful because there's these short bursts of stories. They're just their take on a story often, and they're not actually, they don't even know the real source. They don't really know the background, but they're giving a lot of information to people who grab it and think that now they have more ammo to attack the other side, whichever radio station you're on. So just, I was thinking, is there a way to, or would there be a way to, I don't know if I would say reprimand people, but having a way to say, that story that you heard a half hour ago is false, or mostly false, or something. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if there's a possibility, but it would be great. It'd be great to be able to retract any kind of misinformation that we put out into the world. It's painful, isn't it, Adriel and Bentley? It's like, oh, retracted information. Oh,
There is something called a soundbite, which I take as an equivalent to a meme in a written space, but in a radio space, it's soundbite. And I first heard about it in the context of Mr. President Trump, who is told to be very good at soundbites, and that's a form of very actually, that's a nasty way of communicating, because when you say something that is catchy enough and it's short enough, you don't actually provide any useful information in this thing, but still it spreads like wildfire. He said something that's really catchy and it puts something in a bad light, and yeah, this is wrong. Mm-hmm.
I think if there's, like, this is such a rich space. That's why there's so many people working in it. And yet, like, what could 10,000 people coming together and doing, like, let's say 10,000 Vancouverites, if it was close, came together and said, okay, we clearly as Vancouverites want local, federal, and global news. What is it we need? What are the sectors? And what, is there one we want to concentrate on and start there? Or do we want, like, a lot about a little or a little about a lot, right? So how deep do we want to go? And I think that is about working through it with 10,000 people, asking, like, what is it you trust in news? One of the things I would like to see if we're going to have experts be on the news is like a voting system for who are those experts. I know, like, the background is great, but also, like, okay, you have an economist. It's actually an economist. It's the top of their field. But how many of the other economists agree with them? And how often have they been right? Which I know is the background, but, like, to be able to actually say, you know who I'd like to have a conversation? Like Bernie Sanders and Joe Rogan. I know they already have, but, like, you know what I mean? That, like, we can vote that up and then invite them. And it wouldn't be mandatory. We're not the government, we're not anything, but, like, hey, the people want you to talk. And we want these two experts to have a conversation. If there's going to be experts having conversations, and that's the news. Is, I think, one powerful tool that could be made with 10,000 people. Or, like Matush said, there are experts in that 10,000. So asking who are the medical experts, who are the technology experts, and asking, Why are they experts, and can they actually stand behind that? Like, can they predict things in that field? Do they have unique thoughts in that field? Do they?
Something comes to mind. I think I saw something like this not too long ago about for politicians. But what if you had like a Rotten Tomatoes or a rating system for journalists, and maybe the experts themselves? I mean, I'm on my laptop, so I think like, what if I had a Chrome browser extension that like could automatically find the journalist's name in the article, and then I could click that, and like people could either read reviews, or I could see a bunch of other headlines they had ever written across multiple sites. That comes to mind as something that could be helpful. Maybe I don't know enough about the browser, but like, could a browser extension like automatically, it's the code, right? So could it automatically put in a little rating system next to their name, in the code, and like, you want this browser extension because it's going to help you when you open that article?
It would be so useful, especially in my case. I read quite a lot of like weird stuff, and weird stuff includes people quoting so-called medical experts, and I very often get like, oh, this is proven that something works or something doesn't because the doctor said it is true or it's not. And when I Google for the name of the doctor, yeah, they have the title, but they also have a history of very bad science, of being sued for malpractice and stuff like that. So being able to immediately see all the history of the person, maybe not even with rating, but just raw history. Have they been sued for something? What is the history of the research, and was the research actually the community agreed that the research is correct and stuff like that? It will be very helpful.
Adrian Bentley, do you want to come back in? It was only an invitation. So like have to. I know there's.
Well, that last little bit I was thinking about Wiki Lecture and Adrio's actually, because he has the expert sort of thing. And I don't know, Adrio, if you'd considered a plugin, but you definitely, Daniel, that's definitely possible. I've actually written a couple plugins that manipulate the web page.
One of the things that
there's something else I was going to say there, but go
Yeah,
ahead.
I think the plugin is almost mandatory at this point. Like it kind of has to be a plugin so that you can start to sort of interject this information on, maybe news sources that wouldn't like that level of transparency. And I think things like, it could understand the web page and figure out who the author is. If we have a team of people going through and sort of collecting information and submitting it, you can also just know like, oh, you're at that, web address on that website. You're reading this article. Somebody's already, crawled that, scraped it. We've reviewed it. Here's the outcome. And then as well for things like videos and technically even audio, have something like, if you have a video playing on YouTube that's, been identified by this thing, say, oh, you're playing this video from this source, we've reviewed it, and to change the player to add something to it so that as you're watching the video, things get flagged like, oh, that's true, here's why and how. Oh, this whole thing here is not true, here's why and how. And this thing, it's not true or false, he's just making a claim with no evidence, so, meh.
One of the things when Matush was talking about the debunked doctors and stuff, especially, I actually want a timeline on what happened there. Because if they were credible up until the point they published something controversial and now they've been discredited, what does that mean, right? So like to have the actual timeline of, right, they were sued for malpractice 30 times and then decided to do this versus, oh, they were really well established and then they fell from grace and now we're vilifying them. Like,
yeah, I know a doctor in Australia who's been in a year-long battle to have because they wanted to revoke his medical license. So that could look bad, but really it's because he's bucking a misinformation trend in the medical area that he's in, and the organizations in charge of the medical licenses are pretty biased. So it depends kind of on how you look at it. It'd be hard to get a snapshot into that. Although it'd be good to have the info, but
That's the timeline is going to be helpful.
I think it's also important. Oh, sorry, Daniel, go ahead.
I guess to like dream big as well. You know, if you had this browser extension or, you know, some kind of platform that mixed in, and I mean, what if journalists could also like make a profile on there, and then you could build in like a token system. I mean, I'm the type of person, I'm probably pretty average. I just read the article. I don't follow certain journalists or something, but like if I liked something, then I could see more articles by them, or I could send, I don't know. I'm still concerned about the monetary aspect. You know, it would be cool to be able to have an account and like send people tokens. And once it hit a certain amount, it cashed out. I don't know if anyone knows, could you merge those? That's just me thinking big.
We definitely got off topic all the way. Just because it's very hard to stick with 10,000 people at $100,000. Valid, especially for this one that we literally live in all the time. So we're near the end. I just want to go around and we can each say what we think is the most powerful thing that we could create with 10,000 people and $100,000 in this space right now. And I might already know what 8 rolls and Bentleys are.
well, actually, I probably wouldn't say Reason Score doesn't quite fit in this space. A lot of Adriel's ideas probably will, but I after talking it through, I really like the idea of some sort of random chosen jury to validate or to at least look and see the value of content, and include that kind of retitling that WT Social does, and I think you could do that within that dollar amount in that space. That might be something interesting.
Yeah, I think if you combine that with just like a simple system that sort of help people group news articles, you can say all of these all of these news articles are about the same thing, and then to almost have the jury sort of like try to create the aggregate. To be like, okay, so with all this known, what's true, what should the headline be, that sort of thing. And then I think you can build that out in a lot of different areas.
I can go. For me, I think the most powerful thing we could do with a small amount of money and people is to create an IMBD for politicians and business leaders and journalists. Like, just keep adding to the list as we need them. But like the politicians specifically, where have they been? Where have they worked? Who do they get their funding from? And getting that in a way, and then looking at because that's news in and of itself, right? How do we trust that? Where did we get that from? A lot of it's just public discourse, right? Well, they were the CEO of this company. That's public information. And having that be the case, but having it done, because if we did that collectively, it's not on one person to then be legally liable for, you know what I mean? It's like they're putting out that person's information as opposed to us collectively doing it. Be the most powerful thing, I think.
So that would be the IPDB, Internet Politicians Database. The new name of Wiki Elections, of course. So yeah, that.
I like
that name was actually considered.
Oh, funny. I like that, and I like the fact of having it as a timeline. If you could make it that way, to make it easy view, like click on and then you see that person's timeline, like you're saying, so you can tell where they're coming from.
Also, I like that idea. When I come here, I also just end up feeling a bit inspired. So I guess I'm thinking today about, do I have friends locally that I already know that like would want to get together and just share the stuff that matters to them, on some platform that exists, just to get that going in my own circle. Like, that's what I could probably do today. So that's that.
I love that, Daniel, because the point of this is to bring inspiration. So, like, what could we do with 10,000 people? But, like, bringing it down to the individual, like, and there's things we can do today without getting 10,000 people together is also a very even more powerful thing. So we are at the 1 hour mark. We can say goodbye to YouTube and Facebook if nobody has any closing questions. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.